Hello, everybody, and welcome to Rocket Lasso Season 3, Episode 2. Welcome. First of all, is the video and the audio coming through okay? Because everything suddenly went crazy right before I tried to go live. A couple minutes ago, I was adjusting the camera, and the streaming software crashed. Well, it froze. I couldn't do anything. And then it wouldn't let me force quit it either. It was like, no, you can't do that. I was like, what? So I had to figure that out, and then it logged me out, and I wasn't sure it was sending everything through on both streams, so hopefully it is working well. Okay, good. I was able to fix it all pretty quickly. We're only like 2 minutes behind. All right, so welcome to a regular episode of Rocket Lasso Live. I'm trying to get together a schedule of guests. Actually, I should have looked this up earlier, but do I have a guest lined up already for next week? Let me take a look at my notes. Oh, I gotta look at the calendar for that. Give me just a moment, because if there is a guest, I want to make sure to announce it. Calendar. I didn't mark a person down. Yeah, maybe there is not a current person lined up for next week, but Jonathan Windbrush is on the calendar. And is that confirmed? I'm gonna have to double confirm all these, but I think we've got Nick on the calendar. And Smearballs, Nick as well is going to be a guest, and Rick. There's going to be a lot of cool guests, so I'm excited for that. And I'll be putting together a blog post, and probably on the main live stream page on the new website, it'll also list out the schedule for when the guests will show up. Okay, everybody start getting your questions together. If you have a link, you'll have to be on Twitch. In the description below, I believe I have a link on YouTube to go to Twitch if you want to be posting links. But if you just type out a question, I like those as well. If you are putting a link, be it to an Instagram or be it to a video, it has to be able to show the source, the studio or the artist who made it, because I have to be able to give credit or I will not tackle it. Yeah, everybody get your Unreal questions ready for when Jonathan's a guest. And he's on the calendar. I'll give you a heads up. He is on for March 10th right now. Could change, but that is what it's currently set up for. We've got a lot of people showing up already. Ivan, Jay, Michelangelo, Groove, Jacob, Vittorio? Welcome, new name. RBX, Chris, Chop, Thor, Tabs, Raul, Mason, Darren. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming and hanging out. And over on Twitch, we've got lots of people. Polytext, Pro Tools, Mr. Matt Dog, MW, Oliver, Motion Trash, Crossfader, Paul, Electron, Mickey, Tobias, Oliver, if I didn't say that already, Rogue Electron, Stomich, Pierre, Zach, welcome, Dean, Sean, bunch of regulars from the bonus live streams. By the way, there are bonus live streams on Tuesdays and Thursdays if you're supporting on Patreon, and those have started up again as well. In fact, I wanted to show you, there's more names coming up as well, but I can't keep up with all of them. Orion, Oliver, Clarky, Umer, apologies if that's not right. Prism, thank you everyone for coming and hanging out. Get those questions together, start getting the links out there so we can tackle them. In the meantime, I just wanted to give a quick preview to an upcoming tutorial. It is not ready yet. The tutorial hasn't even been recorded. The plan was to record it yesterday. We ended up spending a bunch of time refining the idea of the tutorial. And when I say we, I mean me and the live chat that was hanging out in the bonus stream. So this is a low quality render. Really sensitive to grab that single pixel. It's a low quality render, but this is the plan, which is this is a expansion on a question from last week's stream. And it's going to be a vacuum forming, some nice high quality vacuum forming. I think it's gonna be a really good tutorial. I'm excited for it. So not sure when that will be out, possibly later next week, possibly the week after. But in any case, I'm going to be experimenting more. The idea should be that you're able to swap out the model really easily and kind of put anything in here that you want. And I think it's a pretty cool setup. And yeah, looking forward to that. Should be cool. And anything else to cover? I don't think so. Oh, I was just doing some volume stuff earlier. So open up a new file. We've got the new folder ready and ready to begin looking at questions. I know there's some people asking me some questions on like Patreon, and I saw some questions on Twitter, but we need the questions here live while we're going. So Let me scroll around, see what we have. Thank you, Aaron. Appreciated. Molly, welcome. All these names I'm not sure how to pronounce. Is it Gly? I'm not sure, but welcome. Thanks for coming and hanging out. Thank you, Crossfader, for linking to the website. And actually, Crossfader has a question here, so I'll click that as the first one. Mute the tab, and let's pull this over and see what we've got. Oh, it kind of looks like... Let's see what we've got. First of all, this is from Asai Gozens, I believe. Asai Gozens from Paris. And this is giving me the vibe of... It looks like a bunch of little wood shavings, kind of Voronoi fracture type chunks, and they are freely flowing around and moving from one spot to another to form these shapes. I think we could do something along these lines. There's a lot of potential places to go. There's calling out Houdini and Cinema 4D, so odds are they created the motion inside of Houdini and then transferred it over to Cinema for rendering purposes. But in that case, that's pretty cool looking. I like it. So let's see what we can do in Cinema. And everybody get your questions together for later. And if you do post a question and I don't tackle it right away, feel free to post it again once you see me sort of wrapping one up. Just don't spam it. All right. So here we are in Cinema R23. And we want to keep it running very quickly. So we'll be able to make more copies if we keep everything very small. So I'm thinking of creating a cube set to 20 by 20 by 20, making it dynamic, right-clicking, simulation, rigid body, and to make this go really quick so we can test things quickly, tell the dynamics that the shape of this, even though it's a cube, I'm going to say actually calculate as a ellipsoid, so essentially as a sphere, and a sphere is the quickest dynamic shape to calculate, so that should make that run really quick. It'll be able to freely roll around. We might change it, but just for our testing purposes, that's the beginning. No reason not to make an infinite floor here, so I'll copy this tag onto the floor. That should probably go back to automatic. And move, this needs to go into a cloner. Make as many of these as we want. Yeah, I'll do a honeycomb array just because I like the shape in general. Space these out a little closer together. I kind of like moving them per step and just eyeballing it in per step. Scaling this until there's a kind of an even distribution, and now we can just increase the count to any size that we want to. Now, I am thinking that this entire setup is very much in the vein of field forces. Now, let me think of how I might go about doing this. The quickest way to make some sort of shape, and we don't need to be trying to identically emulate what we saw, but we want to get approximately there. Something, I believe that in R23, it doesn't show the floor by default. Maybe not at all. I don't think there's an option to turn it on and off, but it's just, we just have to assume an infinite floor. So it's a little, I kind of like being able to see it, but there we go. Looks like we are slightly intersecting it. Oh yeah, I didn't move the cloner up. So we can either move the floor down or the clones up. I guess we'll move the clones up. Just that little bit, so they should fall to the ground. We don't see much. They fall to the ground and they're doing their thing. Just fine. Alrighty. Now we need some field forces to do their thing. What shape are you going to want it to form? Well, let's just start with a letter. That seems like a nice way to go. Lie it flat on the ground. We'll just do a nice big R for Rocket Lasso, T for scale. Make it pretty huge. Maybe not quite that large. Something like that. And why not? Let's get a couple extra lines on the outside to get some extra detail. How would I want to do that? Well, let's just do like a spiral. Keep it pretty straightforward. Or not a spiral, but a circle. If we take an end side and drop it down to two sides, it actually makes it a two-dimensional line that's open. So that is a valid thing to do. I'd like this to be traveling on Z. So let's try the different axis. Yeah, that one. That gets put in the cloner. Holding that Alt becomes a child. Set this to a radial and increase the radius to whatever we want. Something like that. And we make more copies. Let's make 10 of them. And of course, you could do things like make this randomly different scales. Adding a MoGraph random effector. There we go. Random, not position, yes, scale. Scale on Z, and that we can make them larger and smaller. Just a little bit of variation. Now, something that will help us out for making modifications is creating a connector. There's a connect object, and that will be fed the text and the splines. That way, this becomes a single, this is now holding all of our splines, meaning we can drag that in or put other children in without needing to constantly relink everything inside of our effectors. And when I say effectors, right now, I actually mean simulate forces and a field force. This will be what is affecting all of our clones here. Now, I did seem to be running a little bit slow. I might make a few less copies, but with this field force, it's going to be moving everything around. Currently, it's set to add to velocity, meaning it's constantly adding a force, which is, potentially valid. Cranking this up to 55 so we can clearly see it, creating a solid and telling the solid to travel in X. This should just give us a baseline of how quickly these are going to move. So hitting play, you can see, and keep in mind that we're only running about 5 frames a second, 7. You can see how this is all shooting off to the side, and it's shooting off very quickly. But you get a baseline in your head. So now the thought turns into, that gives us a direction. We don't actually need that. What we do need is to drag in the splines as a spline object. That comes into the spline object. And let's preview this via changing our display. So I don't need much in the way of height. Drop that to 20. But I would like this to be pretty large in these dimensions. I don't need to see it everywhere, but along this object would be a good idea. Crank this up, and now we can see what this is doing. Temporarily, I'll hide our clone so we can very clearly see the shape that we're getting. Currently, this would make things travel around our spline. However, changing that to... I didn't think about this. A connect object can only deal with... It has to combine everything, and a spline either has to be open or closed, so this can't output open and closed splines. So this is currently defaulting to open. So I suppose, even though I don't want to, temporarily, I'm just going to turn those off so we can have a closed spline. We'll add them in as a separate object in a little bit. So currently we are on a direction mode. That is what this field force is defaulting to. In the object mode, the spline is set to travel along the spline. I don't want to go along. I want to do a radius, or possibly even better. Yeah, we could do radius, and it's also mask, but let's do radius because I believe that makes it aim inward. If we take this radius and start to increase it, what is going to happen in, I can't remember default, if it's going to attract or push away from the line. So now that that exists, unhide all of our clones, hit play, and they'll only be affected if they're in that little range. But we can now see that all of those are getting pulled towards this line, which is what we're looking for. Excellent. So we need the radius to be probably super huge. We want everything to get affected. So setting up to 1,000, that's hopefully enough to get all the way to the edges. And under remapping, this is the overall strength. I could crank this up all the way, and now it's pretty much... I don't like going to 100%. I've occasionally run into a bug where if everything's at 0 or everything's at 100, then it suddenly turns everything off. So I usually leave that 1%. We won't see that transition, but everything is going to now be attracted to a line. The radius might not catch these ones on the very edge, but it might. So let's hit play and just see if we get something that seems to do it. But yeah, now you can see every single one of these. Yeah, radius wasn't quite large enough, but everything is being attracted to the nearest possible line. And I mean, that's honestly the foundation of this overall. We can now get that basic shape. It's going to try and form this letter outlining it. If we wanted it to be a single line, then we'd have to manually draw an R that has no thickness, not do it from a font. Now, increasing this radius a bunch more. Well, not a bunch more. We should be able to get away with... probably just another 400. Should get it all the way to the edge. Now, that is the basic shape. If we were inclined, we could add additional ones on top of it. Say, we could give it a bit of a direction if we wanted to. Feeding into the field forces, feed the spline again as a spline object. And this time, we will leave it to travel along. If we set the offset up all the way, it's actually full strength the entire time. Turning this off, and it's got, yeah, it's a long, this will be infinite. So now all of these pieces want to travel around the shape. And I turned the other one off, so that's all that's happening. So we should start seeing these traveling around the shape. So combining these two should give us a direction of travel. And we could even rename this. Let's just call this spline around. And this one will be spline attract. Turning them on, add them together, and I will unclamp so additively they could be even stronger. There's a good chance, actually, almost immediately I'm going to drop this down to around 20% because I want it to be a lot more attracted to the line than traveling around the line. I like the idea of it moving around the line, but that is secondary to it's going towards the line. Looks like my radius did still have to be a little larger. That's fine. But, and I know we're not at an amazing frame rate here with how many clones I made. I should probably make slightly fewer so we can run this quicker, but you can see how they're flowing around the shape, and that's going to keep some extra motion going. And something that's kind of cool is if they overshoot here, you see that those cross that threshold, and now they're like, oh, I want to go over to this line instead. So let's decrease our count here. To do that, I'll change this to endpoint and divide these counts by 2. That way, is that, oh yeah, rewind all the way. So now there's significantly fewer, and this should run way faster. So everything gets pulled in, back to the field force, fix my radius. We'll just go up to 2,000 just to make sure everything gets caught. So now these are going to get pulled, and they're going to begin traveling around this overall edge. Now, 222 for the time, just to give ourselves a couple extra frames. As I said, this is an additive force. It's constantly adding this force onto everything. So we can do things to slow that down, like in the dynamics, go under forces and say, actually, let's put a bunch of damping on something, like linear damping. So now it's constantly draining energy out. So they're not going to overshoot too far, and just that constant applied force will be what pulls it forward. And some of these you can even see that they're stuck on each other, so they're not traveling. But I think eventually they will be able to. But you see it's calming everything down. So you could do that. You could also set that back to default. We could also create a simulation force friction. And a little friction goes a long way. You see, actually, this is dramatically draining that out. So dropping this down just a little bit will stop them from overshooting and do a very similar thing. There are, I mean, this one's good because you can add fall-offs to it. And, you know, there's different reasons to use the other ones. But in this instance, either is totally valid. So let's get a little bit of extra randomness going here. I like the basics of what we've got going on there. I might actually make this go a little bit stronger around, make everything a little bit more inclined to start traveling around in their direction. And then, you know, right now everything's starting off really orderly, so a random effector in the beginning could be nice. No height, but we can do enough positional randomness, like 150, so that should start looking pretty random. The scale, let's do a uniform scale. Keep in mind currently everything's a sphere. And let's do absolute so they only get bigger. So now we have some bigger ones. It'll just eat up the space a little bit more. So even though we have fewer, it's going to fill up the space very nicely and run a lot quicker than we had been originally. So that's all looking pretty nice. Let's get a little randomness in here. Not terribly difficult to do. I will move this random down here to make sure that I know that that is what is applying to the cloner. I just like them hanging out near each other. The field force needs to be fed another random field. I do like adding random fields in here. It defaults to noise, which is nice, and immediately we can see that represented here. If I set only that noise, we can see that that is now represented. If I start cranking this up larger, I want to keep on going up and up until I can start seeing a little bit of uniformity in it. You see how now we can actually see the noise pattern emerge through these, which obviously goes a long way to us getting control. When it's really small, we just don't know what's happening. Once it gets large enough that we can see, like even if I was inclined to have this be pretty small, I'd want to scale this up until I could see the noise and then drop it to whatever percentage. If it's, you know, if it's nonsensical at half this amount, it's like, well, I can't quite tell where it is. I'd go to the point where it's like, okay, I can tell now, divide by 2, because then I know where it is. Because anything less than 500 here is just going to look like chaos, I think. But in any case, this can be fed an animation speed. So 100 is, I mean, it's not terribly fast. If I play, we should see these moving around. And actually, they're moving pretty slowly. So we'll go up to about 100. And now they actually have a little bit of speed. They can keep on moving. And that's the only effect happening. But that can also be added or multiplied on top of everything. Right now, it's set to max, but I will set it to add. So they are overall very much attracted directly onto the line, but then they want to travel around, and then the randomness is added on afterward. So these will take a slightly less direct route onto the line, but there'll still be a little bit of movement traveling around, and they won't be quite as stuck to the line. And all of that can be mixed to whatever degree we want it to. A smaller noise would make them a little more chaotic. We could crank the strength up, we could pull it down, and we could, yeah, even here you can see how it's traveling around the line. I think the animation speed could probably go even a little faster. As they're traveling around, I don't mind those moving around a little more. So yeah, those all flow around. Now that that's all working well, let's give it a save. Inside of episode 2, scene files. Field forces. Create shape. So that is going to attempt to form that shape. It will slow it down a little bit, but not too much. Now that we've got this flowing around, I think it'd be kind of nice to tell this cube to actually be calculated as a box. Hitting play, they'll now be boxes, and they will be sliding around the ground. You see, right now they're sliding. They might fall over a little bit, and there's a lot more friction overall. And so we might have to crank the forces. But here's my thought, especially with the one we saw in the reference, the pieces were tumbling as they tried to move. Now, I want these to not be able to slide. So I think I would like to increase the friction on the floor. So no bounce and friction up to 99. 1 second. We were working on that tutorial for like 4 hours yesterday, so I did a lot of talking. Okay, higher friction on that. I might actually crank this friction up really high, like 200, because I am probably going to lower it on the cubes. But the idea here is that these cubes shouldn't be able to slide. As they get pulled, they'll have to roll. But I would like them to be able to freely slide past each other. So I might put the friction down to something like 25 for them touching each other. But now you see it's not quite enough for them to be hitting the heavy friction on the floor. So that can get cranked up at least twice as much to compensate. Yes, they are tumbling now. So these individual cubes are tumbling to get where they want to. And that's doing a fine job to get them to the center point. It's enough power there, but it's not enough power to make them travel around. So back to the field force, we kept everything pretty organized. So here's them traveling around, increase the strength there. Not quite enough, increase the strength again. These cubes might fall asleep, so I'm going to tell them dynamics. Here's their deactivation. I'm going to say 0, 0, so they never fall asleep. Now, we definitely can feel them traveling around. But do they stop? It's actually interesting. Some of them they kind of have to get bumped. In some ways, I like some of them stopping static. We've kind of found a very, very close to their equilibrium. Like, it's almost exactly the amount where they can move. The random strength, we could make that even stronger. Under direction, here's an overall strength. So I could say, actually, I want this to be twice as powerful on the randomness to make those wiggle around. And, I mean, we know what those are doing now, so we don't actually need to have a display. They actually run a little bit faster because it doesn't have to calculate all of those lines. And now we have our cubes trying to travel around the entire object. Hopefully tumbling, moving, gathering up a little bit. And like I said, we're kind of lucky that it stopped, where some of these cubes are like, no, we're static, and then they start rolling. So I kind of like being right on that edge. So yeah, all of that works really well. We could add additional shapes, or because we've built a rig out of this, selecting this text, we'll just change it to any letter we want. So let's just type in C4D. So now we've got some additional letters. It's going to be a little large. T for scale. Scoot it over. Hang on one moment. And we're back. And yeah, so it was able to update and begin traveling around this. And we have every variable that we could want. We could make it more attracted to the inner line. We could only have it be attracted to the inner line based on a smaller fall off. Every possible variable that we want could be swapped in. But overall, I think that this is the type of motion that I was hoping to get. We did have that ring that I was talking about putting around it. I'm not going to put that together because it would essentially be redundant. Because they're open splines instead of closed splines, I would need to make this again and this again, and there's no need for us to go and do that. You see the principles of it here, but we could make any shape that we want, and they will gather around and start traveling around the shape. So I believe that wraps it up. If anybody has any follow-up to that, let me know, and we can add to it. We got more people hanging out. We need more questions to be added. We got a link in. We got some links in Twitch, which I appreciate. On YouTube, feel free to type in any question that you want to. Jay Brown is asking, is there a way to generate clones like this on intersection of points of two pieces of geometry? Hi there, everybody. Lots of people coming in and saying hello. I appreciate it. Once we get started, I don't try and spend too much time just interacting with the chat too much, but we've got some new names coming in. I think Jay Brown's a new name. And Justin made it, and Voxel Retro? I'm not sure if that's Retro. Tricky to say. Rosley, welcome. Greetings from Chicago to people in Malaysia. But anyway, we got extra links coming in. I just want to see if there's any follow-up specifically to this. Nope. Can matrices be dynamic? No, they cannot, Paul. Matrices can, I assume you mean a matrix object that can travel around, but it cannot be dynamic by itself. Manning, yeah, thanks for coming and finally catching a live show. Hi, Alex. But in any case, is there any way to generate clones like this on the intersection of two pieces of geometry? I can think of a couple of approaches, but none that are super dynamic or super fast. I think that's the kind of thing you could have the luxury of getting. You can build that fairly manually. To demonstrate, I shall copy the cloner, new file, paste the cloner, just so we can see this volume. And if we wanted to create this shape, but only in particular places, one of the first things you can do is the form. So this is the shape that it's going to take on. So it could take on the form of a square, a circle, or a spline. So if we were to make a spline, I'm actually not entirely sure how it generates that because I don't do it very often. Lay it on the ground, scale it up. I really just need one that's going to be larger. Letter O. It's not a particularly thick font that we are set to default on. Oops. Get out of the text so it doesn't type into it. A little larger. Okay, so we should see them there. Let's see what this does for us. Feed in the spline, and now you see only the ones that are inside of the spline are being generated. So if you wanted it where two objects intersect, potentially, this doesn't have to be a text spline. That could be just let's make a inside and a spline mask. There it is. One moment again. Geez, got a tickle in my throat. Remember to unmute. So feeding those into the spline mask. These will make sure that this is along Y. So now those are combined. But that could, of course, instead be the intersection of them. Actually, it's not intersection, it's and, which is a little unintuitive to me. But dragging in the spline mask, you see those are only where those exist. And if we were to take the shape and move it around, it should modify where those clones are being created. So that's an easy way of doing it with splines. So those get generated that way. If you had something more complex, you could do something like the volume. Let's set this just back to square. And once you've generated your clones, and this does take a little bit of a cost, but it does also speed it up. We could create a shape. We'll keep these simple. Create a cube, T for scale, make it pretty large. I will visually hide it. And create, in the cloner, create a volume. There it is, volume. So these are not the super quickest things to calculate. This cube is very simple, so that won't take a long time. But here's a volume shape, and I could feed this in, and this is going to do certain effects in certain areas. It's being affected just as a cloner, and currently it's scaling down to 0. But I believe we could also say affect the visibility. So now those are essentially kind of the only ones being made. In some ways, they are being calculated in the beginning, but then they're not. I don't think like dynamics would calculate on them, so it's kind of like a halfway point of speed. And now that this shape has been generated, let me think. Like, yeah, that's pushing them down to 0 in a volume. Actually, now that I think about it, that's not quite the way I would do it. Instead, I would do it with a plane. The plane would not affect the position, but it would affect the visibility. And then feeding it different shapes, say a spherical field. Those will only exist inside of the spherical field with no fall off. And it doesn't need to affect the color. So that's where that is. It doesn't need to be a spherical field. It could be any shape. So let's bring in a torus shape. Bring that over. And this can be just dragged in as a shape inside of here. So this spherical field currently is not doing anything. And we can add in, I mean, we can just feed in the torus directly. Just drag the torus straight on in. And this can be interpreted as points, but it can also be interpreted as the volume itself. Once again, the more complex the object, the slower it will go. But now you can see that, once again, that is generating exactly the stuff inside those shapes. Now, multiple shapes could be combined in more complex ways. Just for clarity, I'll just create a second torus. That gets dragged in. We have a second torus that is viewing the volume. And so just so you can see them, I'll scoot one off to the side. So the top one is currently overriding the bottom one, but if we set that to add, then now both of those are combined. It could also be set to subtract. So now we've got one shape subtracted by the second shape. So yes, this is how you could add in any combination of objects, be it geometry, be it projecting splines on it, be it, and then even that, it starts going beyond that, where we could be forming these into a volume of some sort. And it could be pretty low poly because the resolution of our clones is not terribly high. So that could be a volume builder and a volume mesher, feed in both toruses, and that should turn those into a blob where they're actually combined. Currently, the poly count is crazy high. It doesn't need to be. I can crank this up and up and up until we have just enough resolution that the toruses continue to exist, which is right around here, I'm thinking, for the scene. And now we have two toruses creating a single blob shape, meaning inside this plane, instead of feeding in any of these, we can feed in the singular volume mesher, treat that as a volume, hide the original mesh. And now you see again, we get that same end result. We get these clones being created, but it's now via a single volume. So it just depends on where you want to pay the cost and the penalty. We could be using a bool and booling them together. Bools can get a little twitchy, so the volume builder is going to give you more consistent results, but it could potentially be slower in certain circumstances. Of course, this is combining them, but now we could do subtraction via the volume builder. So this is like A with a union of B, but I could say, actually, I want to subtract it, and now you see one is subtracting the other. So that's a bunch of different ways of tackling the idea of only creating clones in a particular spot. And it's really nice being able to use something like the plane effector, because now this is what is single-handedly affecting the visibility, which is creating the clone. And we can just keep on adding modifications inside of its fall off to actually tell where it's applying. And that's what's great about the entire effector being separated from the fields concept. Before, fall-offs were really important, but now with current fall-offs in the last couple versions of Cinema, we now have what it does is separated from where it does it, and that is very, very powerful. Hopefully that covers that. I will save this file, but we jumped around a lot, so I don't know that the particular file is terribly useful, but why not? Important to note, everybody that's watching, is you get access to the scene files if you're supporting on Patreon. Limit clones to intersection of object. There's a title for you. All right, it seems like I covered what Jay was looking to get from it. Okay, I tend to jump back and forth between Twitch and YouTube, so that was from YouTube. So back to Twitch. I'm going to the newest stuff because I saw there's some older ones, but the Grade Salam has a link. Are you just communicating with each other, or is it for me? Holy cow. Are you replying to Trey? So that might not be for me. A lot of conversation going on, which is a good thing, but it just makes it tricky for me to find what I'm going for. Dean has a question linking to Instagram. Mute it in case there's audio. This is from Dan H. It's a collaboration with Rendered. Let's see what we've got. Oh no, okay, it is animated. Ooh, blah, 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 blah. That's cool. Curious if they have there's a couple different things I can think of. Let's see if they call out specifically anything they might have done. Sculpture art, that's not super specifically. Because of the shapes that eventually get created, I can't manually, or I can't scrub this, it just plays and I can pause it. It's pretty long. Oh, it's an advertisement for Engage. It should reset in any second. There. So the way it's drifting here gives us a lot of information of the approach, but there's a lot of approaches to this type of thing. Let me give you a quick for instance. If I had a sphere, I would like it to be significantly subdivided. 48 segments. So that's a significant amount. So let's say that we have a sphere and Control D, dynamics, general, gravity equals 0. So this is not going to be inclined to move downward. Something I could do is make this a soft body. I don't think this is what they did in that piece, but I just want to show you because I think it's a cool technique. If we tell the soft body to ignore self collisions, that means it can pass through itself is the important thing there. So if I play right now, nothing should happen. This is a soft body with no gravity, no forces applying anywhere. However, if we add another force, field force, I don't think we need it quite as strong as last time. So 22, random field, crank up the noise until I can see a little coherence. That's excellent. Give it a similar speed, 222. If I play right now, actually the forces should apply and we should start seeing this. Oh yeah, all the springs are, I guess, super relevant here. Currently the sphere is attempting to keep its general shape via its soft bodies settings. However, I could say, you know what? Don't worry about stretching. You're allowed to stretch. Don't worry about not bending. Don't worry about flexion. So I've essentially said, like, okay, there's no springs here. It's not attempting to keep this together. So if I play, it is free to just utterly deform. And you see here, just explode and travel really far away and do whatever it wants, passing through itself. We could give it like a little bit of structural. So it should be able to stretch, but it's not going to try and fly super far away. And I'm trying to think of a way I could keep it completely static. But next up, adding a linear field set to, I always get backwards, y plus, yeah, I think I got it correct that time. So here's a linear field. Actually, I think I did do it backwards. My plus. And that, I would like to mask this random field with this linear field. So nothing should be happening until I move this down, and now the forces will begin to apply on the top, and you can see a little bit how that could start us deforming the object. Now, because I did add springs, these bottom ones are going to, it's going to, if something gets tugged, it's going to affect the point next to it, which affects its neighbor, and eventually the bottom will get tugged away. Something to keep in mind. Having done that, I mean, I'm reluctant to make anything editable. This would be a fine place to add a recall tag if I wanted to bring it back. So that's a plugin that we make at Rocket Lasso. So I just made a recall tag, but this could be made editable. And because that's been made editable, go to point mode, add a set vertex weight, set to 0. So now there's a vertex map on there. And this vertex map will be driven by fields, and I don't want to freeze. I do want that same linear field to come in. So only where this gravity, only where the linear field has said, hey, these forces should apply, will they get applied. Well, now I'm going to say structural is multiplied by that vertex map. So hopefully now the top will get deformed and the bottom, it's still being slightly affected. I was hoping it wouldn't affect at all, and I'm not sure why it is being affected at all. It should just be the linear field, and if it truly fades out, then those bottom points shouldn't be affected by anything. But you can see what I'm getting at, that we can start getting we have a regular shape, and then a deformation will begin. I can think of some alternatives or additional things we could do to limit that. And in addition to this traveling around and kind of doing this blob thing, that might look a little bit ugly there. Let's do some additional things. I'd like a solid, so that this is going to, in general, want to travel upward. Set that to add and hit play. And now these are going to, oh, that's the mask. Let's make a folder. The folder contains the random field and the solid, and the folder gets the mask. So the mask is the linear field, and this mask goes away. Okay, so now you see I've got a solid, which is adding on top of the random field, making sure it's affecting the position, and this is the direction, so I think they're relevant. And yeah, oh, we need direction turn on, very important. And those are getting masked out by this linear field. So now you see it's going to get drifted away and get pulled up. Now, like I said, unfortunately, it's still, this is still getting affected by the weighting below, even though according to this vertex map, it shouldn't be. So that somewhat dead ends there, but I want to finish the thought, which is, let's pull back on the strength of the add so it can go upward a little bit, just not quite as much. So you get this nice blob going. It's a little bit lava lamp-y. But we're going to get like these wrinkles and whatnot, and they will pass through themselves, as I had said, but something, you know, just field forces and fields in general combine so nicely with something like the volume builder with a volume mesher, and if that sphere gets fed into those, then it just will blob all of that together, and we're left with the end result of it. Oh, sometimes my mouse catches and it keeps dragging. So now this can get all that really nice blobbiness from the original shape, but it's not going to look like it passes through itself, because we just end up with, if something passes through, which it likely is, you can see that like all this mess down here, well, that mess just gets converted to nice looking geometry, and we don't have to worry about that. So those combine very nicely. I mean, there are things we could potentially do to stop that from moving away. There's a little brute force, but just for an experiment, I'll create a sphere and put that sphere inside of it and create that as a collider body. I just want to see if that, because I told it not to self-collide, but it will collide with this. So yeah, see, it's fighting to not get away from that. So that's somewhat trapping it. And you see that drifting upward doing its thing. It's a little bit coherent. We could turn off the coherence entirely. Drop this down to 0. And now those are free to kind of move around however they want. It turns a little more smoky, which is kind of neat, but without any coherence, like any point can do anything. So I do feel like a little bit goes a long way just to make sure that they don't get too far away from themselves. And yeah, pretty cool effect. I don't know, as I said, I don't know if that's what they're doing in any way. I kind of doubt it. That same concept could be applied to splines as well. Those are potentially, splines could be drifting away. And then it's not something I can super do, but I do believe in Arnold, there's a bunch of volume, like creating volumes from like meshes, and that you could Boolean out a volume of noise. Well, we can do that too, but Arnold can do a really nice job of it. I'm not sure what this is called. This blob away from solid shape. So generically, I like some of the effect there, but we'd have to figure out this bottom part. There is no easy way. The SoftBody does a great job there, and we tell it not to collide with itself, or don't worry about colliding with itself. It actually runs pretty quickly. I don't know if other things do as well. I'd be curious. I'm going to delete that, and we don't need recall in this circumstance. The cloth, to what degree can we tell cloth does cloth have a setting to not worry about intersecting itself? There's like self collision. Actually, it's kind of off by default, and we have all these point collisions. If I turn all of those off, will it do a similar thing? Forces, gravity. And under expert actually is limit to, and that's where we can add in its own forces. So I could add in the field force here. That should apply to everything. This collider doesn't mean anything. So if I play, does it do a similar thing? It's definitely getting pulled upward. Doesn't seem to be applying so much to the individual points. But, well, I guess we would need to kill off the stiffness, flexion. Yeah, there. Okay, almost. Okay, now you can see it's almost doing the exact same thing. So a little bit of, oh, wow, a little flexion goes a long way. So drop that down to like 1. Now, I think the advantage that cloth might give us here over the other one is under dresser, we could say, yeah, that's all good. Do a look from the side, rectangle selection, drag this up, and now say, actually UI invert, because this will, or no, that's fix. So yeah, UI keep it on the bottom, and fix points, set, and now those are stuck there. So exact same concept, but now we're applying it to cloth instead. And now it should keep those trapped there. And now, yeah, now you can see how these are, it's not going to escape. And let's see what we can do here. Flexion 0. And as soon as I do flexion 0, you see it immediately starts escaping. It can start intersecting a lot. Stiffness, let's see what a little stiffness does. 1%. Yeah, I mean, very lava lamp-esque. And you can see these drifting around. I mean, pretty neat. I could see a lot of use out of this. Can we do fractions, 0.1? Yeah. So that's my, if we find the right combination here, like a little bit of stiffness, and a little flexion, you can see that that is now indeed stretching out quite a bit. But I think it would have a limit. Yeah, it started slowing down there at the end. So pretty cool. I had actually never tried switching this over to cloth, but because of the way we're using it, I don't think there's a reason not to use cloth. And you can definitely see where it's like, no, I don't want to get pushed too. Actually, no, it's in the volume builder, so I can't trust the resolution. But yeah, okay, yeah, you see it was only able to get to so far, and it stopped and pulled down. If we have a random field doing a bunch of randomness, actually, let's just try creating, because it's simple enough right now, create a simulation turbulence. Forces turbulence, and this should be just a big old turbulence. In fact, I'd like to see just what it's doing. So back to 0. Oh, and let's make sure I'm going to not limit it to that, so it means it should have everything affecting it. So we've got a turbulence slightly affecting it. Jumped up to 22 and give it a significant amount of scale, and this should be kind of blobbing it all over the place. And it's free to just pass through itself, so keep that in mind. So yeah, you can see kind of some left and rightness right now. So I'll turn the other one back on again, let them combine. So there should be a general upward push, but also drifting left and right. It's still in the volume, so we can get these intersecty blobby shapes, and we can see that just a sphere turns into like this crazy shape. We are getting, let me find a, okay, you see how it gets crazy thin here? We have ways we can get around that as well. Inside the volume builder, adding the dilate and the road is essentially an inflate effect. So if we say 0, then there's no inflation. We're currently at a voxel size of 8. So if we keep on increasing this up to 4, we are guaranteeing that even if there's a flat sheet of paper, there's enough thickness that it will show up in the volume. So this now has a minimum thickness, which means there should never be a hole. And that travels around doing its thing. Let's look at it kind of flat. So yeah, now we get a pretty nice kind of blobbing effect overall. This could then be fed a smoothing deformer. I do like smoothing deformers. Drop the stiffness down to get maximum effect everywhere for lots of smoothing. We can also add in some smoothing in the volume builder, but those take a while to calculate, so I tend to avoid it if I need to. Yeah, we just can jump up a little bit higher to smooth that out overall. But now, yeah, it is a volume, and it will blob around. Does this have to show? Don't draw them, please. Yeah, so we get this nice little shape drifting around. Once again, I have no idea if in any way they were doing anything similar to this, but it's a cool effect, and I do like it. Save this as another iteration of this one. Now, there's two different... I'm trying to think if there's a third way I might go about affecting it. I mean, you can do volume intersections of things, but that would turn complex. We could have an entire volume of objects and let those start drifting away, and then using volumes take a bite from one or the other. The other element to it was that they had two different textures. Like as it drifted along, it started getting that iridescent look. We could, I'm not going to go deep into it, but that type of thing you could potentially do if you just have your base object and then everything else has a different material. I'll emulate that here by creating a second sphere. Delete the tags off of it because we don't need those. And honestly, we could do it with no, we can't do a volume tag because you can't put a volume tag, or I'm sorry, a vertex map tag on a volume mesher because it has to be editable and that wouldn't work. But we can use the good old Proximal. So if I were to create a new material, and we're going to make this as black and white as possible by literally turning on the luminance channel. And inside of luminance, create the old... I think it's an effect proximal, and the proximal will take in a null or a shape, and in this case I'm going to say use the vertices, and for all purposes what it's doing is making a little radius around every single point and then creating a spherical fall off from that, going from 0 to 100%. So if this material were to be applied to this volume mesher, it's checking, are the points actively near this original shape? Now, this is going to look a little bit rough in the beginning, and I don't want this sphere to show, but we should see some effect. If I render right now, yeah, you can see, I'm going to add a little bit of red on here, just so it's not black in the background. So you can see we got this little bit of red showing up here. So that is everything that's out of the fall off. So inside of the proximal, this is currently set to linear add. I'll set it to smooth and lighten so it can't overpower. And now you can see there's going to be a fall off falling out from it. And we can set this radius to whatever we want. If we double that outer radius, and we're getting a smoother fall off. And now you can see as it drifts away, that can start taking on other colors. And this proximal could be used at, even though we're on a volume, this proximal could be used as a mask to be like, okay, here is texture A, mask it to texture B, and this would generate that. So I'm not going to go any further explaining the two different types of material because we could literally put any material here and any material here just using this type of proximal setup to do a fall off. If it was something that had been made editable, we could use a vertex map, but you can't do a vertex map on something that hasn't been made editable. If we could get a vertex map that worked on parametric objects, that we'd be talking. That would be seriously powerful. I'll just save this for another version. With Proximal. So I'm going to call that one wrapped up. Where, oh, that was a link. So that came from Twitch. Would be interesting to apply a volume redshift material to it. Would look like wispy smoke. No, I agree, Michelangelo. You totally can. In fact, that's something I was playing with earlier today. Is I created a volume because you can make, if you're using redshift. I'm sure different renderers can do similar things, but let me just walk you through here. I have a. Here is a line of matrices, and then I'm randomly moving them, and there's a spherical fall off, so they're less random on the end. And then I created a tracer, and it's interlinking all of them and then smoothing itself out a little bit. And then I clone another line on top of that, and then apply a second random. So then, and I've kind of got this wavy line of them. And then if you feed this into a volume builder, set it to fog mode, and then turn it on, we are now generating a fog volume. And Redshift can see that if you apply a Redshift volume material. And if I were to open up the Redshift viewer, actually, it's already stored there, but there we go. You can see that I have now created a little cloud generator from scratch, and I could make that look however I want to, playing with different settings. So pretty cool. So yeah, we could take that entire concept and have that volume builder be basing it on fog and not, what do they call it? There's volume type fog. Typically, it's on signed distance field, but if you set the fog, then you could immediately make it do this type of thing and have a controllable wispy smoke. RBX, is it possible to make a braid with hair, as in hair on a character, dynamically? There's sort of, well, there would be, can we make a braid that is dynamic? And then there would be, can we braid something dynamically, which are two slightly different questions. Hello, Sergi. Hello, Shadow. Thanks for coming and hanging out. Scrolling down, checking out more chat. So as I just said, those are sort of two different questions. It's such a pain to use. You can't string a hair together terribly well. The first one, I don't know. Unfortunately, RBX, and for everybody, there's a braid that uses hair dynamics. There's a very big lag when it comes to the chat, especially from YouTube. So I now don't remember which I said first. So creating, oh yeah, the second one I said was like do the braiding dynamically. What I would say is if you do make a braid, and I don't know how to make a braid, I don't know how you actually braid something. I kind of do. I know there's several different types of doing it, so I'm going to make a quick fakey braid just to kind of show you a very quick and dirty version of what I'm thinking. I'm just going to do it out of a couple helixes, which is not a real braid, I know, but it's just what I could do quickly. So create two different helixes, offsetting them 180 from each other. So let's just call that a braid, which it's not. Those we could also do a trick I like doing, which if I want to flatten these out, we could scale them down to 0. I don't like making it editable if I don't have to, and I would actually like making these a little bit taller. So let's say 500 and double the spin. Okay, so if I wanted to flatten these out, I would make a cloner, put that into a cloner of 1, so linear 1 clone. And I'll make a second one here. I might be able to put them in the same one, but I'm not 100% sure. Actually, that'll take over, so it could have been instances of the same thing. This actually isn't a terrible idea here. Let's make it extra fancy. Create an instance of this, and then that instance can be fed into this cloner. This is a single object. Transform it and spin it 180. And now any change I make to 1 will happen to the other. And best case in point here is shrinking the radius down. We can actually like taper this braid off. But what's extra nice here is these cloners can be used to dynamically kind of scale this down. I can say 0.1, so it's not completely flat, but I've now flattened that out to a significant degree without having made anything editable and without doing any scaling, which is always a little bit dangerous. So those two become, so we've now got a bit of a helix, a little bit of a braid type thing. I'm pretty sure if we ran like a line in between those, that might make a more for real braid, but let's just leave this kind of conceptual. These could probably get combined now into a connect. So connect, that becomes a single spline. That gets fed into a sweep. Hold down Alt or hold down Shift as I create this end side. T for scale. So we end up with something kind of like that. And what's great is I can be like, okay, I scaled those down too far, and I can increase the scale there, and you see how those got modified. Very nice. This sweep, I can say end scale and pull out. You see it's kind of backwards, so I'm not going to modify the end scale. Instead, I can take the start scale and pull this down, and let those taper down. So we get kind of that cool shape, and it's an entirely parametric setup. I think it looks neat. So let's say that we've now got this geometry, and we want it to behave like a hair. First of all, let's modify our mesh. Right now, it's way too subdivided. Selecting that one helix, it's got uniform. Drop that down. Actually, this can probably be set to none. So this now has no subdivisions, but we now have our subdivision point count. And the lower we can make this, the better it will be for us. It could always get subdivided later, so I think that's about as low as we can go. Sweep, caps. I'm going to say I don't care about the caps right now. So now we have a pretty clean piece of geometry. I'll save it before we do anything that might break it for a braid. Now, you know what? Because we have the opportunity to, and we are in R23, how about we actually try and throw this on a character? And I can do that by going to motion capture. And I'll steal out the male puppet. And we'll have to shrink the braid down, not surprising. And then go up a layer, and R23, we have our motion capture. And sprinting loop, that should really give us something that shakes. And I want to transfer onto the character this motion. You see he'll jump into a new position, and I should be able to play, and he will be running in place, and it's working pretty much perfectly. Excellent. I wanted him in place. Male puppet, mesh, character, hide that. Okay. So now we have a character that we can actually pretty easily add hair to. So selecting the mesh, we now see just the mesh. Do a loop selection. I'm going to add the hair. I'm going to be pretty sloppy with this. Let's do a loop selection there. Actually, it kind of loops around in some pretty interesting spots. Do that. And, oh, this is going to be a bit tricky. UF for a fill, and I want to just fill that, so that gave me that selection at least. Trying to think of a quick way to do this a little bit more cleanly, but I can't think of one, so let's just go to a side view. I'm going to select through visible elements, and now I can just symmetrically, select things. So we could make an entire head of hair here. I've been using a couple different tools, so I can't remember the shortcut for growing that, but let's just say that's the hair. And let's go and grow the hairs. Simulate hair, add hair. So now we've got crazy hairs shooting off of his head. The length can be pretty short, so let's just say we're doing that. We're going to go a little bit crazy here. But there we go. Without even changing anything else, I should be able to hit play, and now we've got an entire head of hair running on the character. And the head could become a collider object. Let's not worry about that quite yet. But now we have that one braid. Let's bring that back. T for scale, and scale this down until it doesn't actually have to be, but I'm going to scale it down to about the length of one of the hairs, because now I'm going to go into hairs and say save again. I'll save as B. And hair generate. Don't make a hair. Instead, make an instance of the instance of this sweep. So that should hopefully along axis Y be creating that as a hair, but we're not really going to see, well, it's possible I have to do more. But we're not going to see anything until I go into the hair material and add a bunch of thickness, because it's really thin right now. We might not see it at all. Let's say 11 by 11. And yeah, we're still not seeing it. I have to remember, how do we make it show the geometry? And it might need to be made editable, which is a bit of a danger. Instance hair, don't render hairs, create an instance, alignment, dynamics, parting. There is the editor, but generate, render as. Oh, no, I don't think it's that stuff. None. It's already set to as render. How do I get the geometry to show up? I feel like they added a new setting in here that I am currently missing. I'm going to make a temp backup of that, make this editable, make sure that that is what it's fed. Yes. No, I already added the thickness in. Oh, okay. I think I did have to make it editable. It has to be an editable mesh, which is a little bit of a pain. And then I had to wait a long time because this is not just generating one per. It's not generating one per. It's generating one for every hair, but the hair, I should say, to generate as guides. There we go, a lot better. So now those are generating properly. It looks a little funky because it appears to be backward. Is there a way to reverse it inside? No. Alignment. I might just need to flip the axis. Apparently I do. So temporarily turn off the hair. I'm gonna hit, I'm on the axis tool, hold down shift as I spin this 180. I guess it's just this number, so we can type in 180. Remember to turn off axis, otherwise it can cause us trouble. Turn on the hair again. There you go. At least it's pointing in the correct direction. I had already increased the thickness, so that thickness can now be dropped to something more reasonable. Let's try 5.5. Closer. 2.2. There we go. So now they're starting to get smaller. So you can now see I've generated this geometry on top of every individual one. Obviously, that's going like crazy over the top, but let's see how reasonably that runs. Not terrible. Yeah, so now you can see that we've kind of manually made these crazy hairs that are going onto the character. So it's not a braid, it's a bunch of braids, and we are fully using the hair dynamics. We could tell the hair dynamics also that they could be avoiding each other more by going under dynamics. And I think there is, like, there's, yeah, surface radius, but there's also the, is surface radius about like hairs? Animation maps modifier advanced. I think it's just that. Is that the radius of the hairs? Because those are currently like too thick, so we can say 2, and it might keep them apart more. Seems to be, but I'm not 100% sure. But keep in mind that I have now applied this to like an entire head of hair. It runs pretty well, and it's pretty good. There's a good chance that you wouldn't want that to be a crazy, you know, you wouldn't want an entire head of those. You just want it to be on one. So this could be modified to essentially doing the entire process. I'm trying to think of what the quickest way is to limit this. It's currently on this polygon selection, so if we find the proper polygon selection, we should be able to, well, it's going to be a polygon selection on the head, so it's this. So if it is limiting to that, we could say actually hair, we just want you to be right there. And selection, set selection to override that, and let's see if it actually updates our hairs. Hair update, update guides. Oh dear. Polygon vertex old. Let's say growth. Oh, we have to do a complete reset. So under editing, I'm gonna say regrow. I think I had the selection selected, so it went straight through the face. So it's also on his nose. I'm gonna leave it. So now you can see anyway that I've got like I've got 4 braids on the back, but we could have made it just 1. And you can see it's now running on those hair dynamics. And then he's got really long nose hairs as well. It's colliding with the body, or it's going to pass right through the body, but we could say, and this won't necessarily be quick, but on the head, go under hair and say it's a hair collider. And that also goes onto the neck. Copy it there. And it also goes onto the torso. The only places that it might hit right now, it could slow it down. It might not be terribly accurate, but you can at least see it's bouncing off of those. So we are now using the hair dynamics to just project whatever geometry we want to onto it. I think you can also create instances of splines. So potentially that could have been a braid of generated splines as well. So that could have been like a whole series of splines traveling through and then reprojected on to stay on the head. Things get really specific and you have to do a lot of modifications and whatnot afterward, but I think that kind of covers the main chunk I wanted to. Tyrone, are hair-to-hair forces not turned on? Is that like a separate thing? Because under dynamics, there's rigid collisions, but is there like a completely separate checkbox for that? I thought, where would that be? Parting hair advanced. I think it does that automatically. Like, oh, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. Totally blanking on it. But I don't see a hair-to-hair. Yeah, see dynamic guides, and I think I told them to be a radius of 2, but I might be missing a setting somewhere. Oh, here, hair to hair. Yeah, it's under forces. So, yeah, that's going... Yeah, okay, so these are now trying to stay away from each other. And I don't know if that is based on what radius. Oh, here's hair to hair setting. So let's drop that down to like 1. Okay, it's really trying to push all those away from each other. So use with caution, but it looks a little more Cthulhu-esque. Probably, especially if you look from the front. Yeah. Yeah, that's rough. So yeah, kind of a goofy little ending there, but I like it. Let's leave it there. Bump, bump, bump. Yeah, I didn't realize hair to hair was under forces, but it also goes to that these are not, it's not actual like real dynamics. It's forces. It's hair to hair forces. So it's more that the hairs are kind of have a fall off around them. It's kind of trying to repulse all the other hairs that are near it. Justin, you can always post it again. Like, don't feel bad for reposting a question again later in the chat. Just don't spam it. If you see me wrapping one up, post it again. It's your best chance to get hit for me to tackle it as I go. I don't know that the roots are moving, Dean. I think it's more, in this case, it's that there's an inside and outside of the head, and the inside is got hairs as well. I just didn't bother cleaning it up. Let's see. Dim, thank you. I think it will be a good season. We've been getting very good questions. I really liked the first episode. We still got a whole 45 minutes. We have a question from Tyrone. Let's check out what we've got. It's Instagram. I'm going to mute. Ooh, that's cute. This is from Ivazowski. That's as close as I'm going to get, sorry. But we've got these things randomly. We've got spheres rolling down and pushing keys, and the keys are staying kind of in their lane and then pushing up again. So that is cool. I think we might be able to do something along those lines. Open up a new file, and let's create the basic rig for the key. Well, I guess we could spend a second modeling a key, an old school keyboard key. Who has keys like that anymore? I doubt almost anyone. T for scale that down a little bit. Do a loop selection, UL, MF, do 2 cuts. Select this middle polygon, and I guess it would mess up those edges. So maybe I'll go to the side view, select all, K for the knife tool. It's currently visible only. I'll turn that off. Do a cut straight through, and then go back here, and as a way of not, I could have just moved that down, but it would have deformed to the overall shape. So actually, is this even a good idea? I think we want to stay on those edges. Yeah, I'll keep it simple. Because we'd subdivide this, I'll just pull this down. Those are going to be tapering inward a little bit, but I can just counter that by counter scaling it back out again. And there might be a bit of roundness on the keys. So we hit U, B, M, F, do a single cut. And I could select that point and that one and these two. T for scale, and just round those out a little bit. And potentially the center point could be a little more depressed, depending on the way we want the key to look overall. Potentially these curve down as well. I mean, I'm just kind of going from memory of the way these used to look. It's probably a little exaggerated right now, but I think that would work fine. And then here's something, let's see, what's the best way to go about doing this? We could use, if we put in a subdivision surface, it's going to round out the entire thing. And I can get rid of these bottom polygons, which will automatically sharpen it up on the bottom. It's a little bit like a tooth. What we really need is some edges to be sharper. So that can be done with a bevel deformer. Creating a bevel deformer, drop this as a child. Immediately you can see it get a lot sharper, but this is a perfect opportunity. Use angle is turned on by default. In the past it didn't used to be. Changing this to solid though, this is going to create a perfect bevel creator, or like perfect for rounding. So as we increase our offset, it's giving us this kind of cut, which is perfectly going to allow us to add exactly as much sharpness as we want on the edges here. So how sharp do we want the key to be? We want it to be that sharp, and that works really well. Subdivision surface, this can just be 1-1, and this is probably fine for dynamics. We'll probably even simplify it more, but there we go. That's a key for us. This needs to become dynamic. Let's just rename this key. Right click, simulation, rigid body. So that is now rigid body. If we play it, shall fall away. It's also super huge right now. Uh-oh. The subdivision surface might not like being dynamic. So I'm going to make a copy of that, make it editable, and now it can be directly on that geometry. And now you see if I, let's just do a test. If I play, oh, they're colliding with each other. This one can just be hidden. That's fine. But I bet you if we hit play and we rewind, it jumps back up. The subdivision surface was causing it to kind of hiccup one frame. So we'll just bake that down. Anyway, that's now dynamic. But of course, if we were to hit it with something, it's going to move around. So we need to limit it to only a particular type of movement. That type of movement will be, we'll do a dynamic connector. So this connector is going to connect this key to nothing. I want to limit it to a, I guess it's just a single slider. So this is now on a slider. We have to give it a direction. So spin it upward. And this key is now allowed to, I believe if we hit play, it's going to fall with it. Why is it falling with it? Maybe it needs to be B. I'm not sure. Yeah. Oh dear. Slider, lower, upper. Okay, there. I turned around some limits. Bunk. There we go. You see the key can fall down. And as a quick way of testing this, if we created a turbulence, I'm going to create a really strong turbulence. Let's go 155, give it a little bit of scale. And the hope is that this force is strong enough. 555. Yeah, see, now it's strong enough and you can see it, the wind will occasionally blow it upward and it can't get past that point either. So now there is a connector that is attempting to keep it on this line and it can't spin, it can just move up and down. I don't think it can spin. So it can't go, it can go a little bit down and it really can't go up at all. So that should probably go to about 0. Let's say 0, and now I think that will stop it. So now the key can fall down, and honestly, it'd probably be pretty subtle. Keys can't move that much. We might leave it a little exaggerated just for our purposes, but that seems fine. And temporarily, I'm going to set a negative gravity just to make sure it can't travel upward. Yeah, so it just stops there. It can't go up, but it can go down that little bit. So that is also working pretty well for us. Oh, back to default gravity. Neat. So now let's make a spring. Forces Nope, not force, it's dynamic spring. So here's a dynamic spring. And we can do this two different ways. We could say that I want this key to be getting pushed away from the ground, or we could put the spring up in the air and say, actually, it's constantly trying to pull it up to that particular spot. So currently there is gravity, but you see it cannot quite go down. And I have no idea kind of what the settings are going to be doing for us. But let's try dropping a dynamic sphere on it and see what happens. Okay, you see it's enough to go push down a little bit. So the spring is pretty strong right now. It's got a rest length. Let's say actually it's got like a rest length of 0, a stiffness of 0.1. Bunk. Okay, so you see when the sphere is hitting it, it's enough to push it down. So the sphere, if we're being anything similar, and honestly we should probably do, well, I guess the sphere is still fine. This is just the concept. So you can see that's way heavy enough to push the key down. If we push the sphere off to the side and do it, it should push it down, and when it moves away, you see our key now goes back up again. So that seems to be working pretty much perfectly. So if that is the rig, let's see if this can handle a cloner, which you never know if it can. So this is going to require the spring, the connector, and the spring. Can our key get cloned, and does it automatically work, or do we have to make it editable? I don't know. So these are a little bit bigger than that. Just for simplicity, I'll shrink the key a hair, and now it just perfectly fits in a default cloner. And the first thing we need to do is scoot this off to the side, hit play, bunk bunk. Oh, it works inside of a cloner. So that is awesome. What that means is we could just make as many of these as we want. And let's do per step, so these can go blah, blah, blah. Make a whole row of those. So we've kind of got our keyboard now. Take this sphere, scoot it off to the side. And we'll give it a little bit of speed. Here's the sphere. Give it a dynamic custom initial velocity, -x, -555. It might be way fast. It might be way slow. Hit play. Actually, yeah, relatively slow, but look at that. Our keys are being pressed. Let's go 3 times faster. That's heavy enough to make them roll and do their thing, and we have fully dynamic keys. So this could kind of be anything we want it to be, and this could be, it could be raining down dynamic objects. We could, anything dynamic, and they all run inside of a cloner, which is the fun part here. That's really neat that it allows that to happen. And you can make as many of those as you want to. If we had, I don't have like a series of images to do it, but if you had every letter of the alphabet, I guess it wouldn't be in like keyboard order, but if you had every letter of the alphabet as a like PNG sequence or a JPEG sequence or something, you could actually just make a single material and then have it automatically apply uniquely each one or randomize them, which would be pretty cool. And then, yeah, I mean, you could do tons of things in addition to this. You could probably apply different colors as the key is hit and have those fade away. This could be, there could probably be a vertex map here, so it could actually remember these keys and then move back up again. We could have done this entire rig not using dynamics, but just purely using like effectors and fall-offs and decays and whatnot, which could have been cool. I mean, dynamic is the way to go if you can do it for real, because that's just working great. Yeah, I can't, that's pretty much it. This is the setup. You just build it for real, limiting it on a connector. This is like a rail or a slider, I guess they call it. And then a spring to force it up or to pull it up. And we get the nice springiness. And if we had the springiness to different levels, it could probably be, let's put it back to 1. This will probably be kind of springy here. Yeah, see, it's strong enough now that it's constantly trying to pull it up to the point where when the spear hits it hard, it's going to stop. But if we pull the spear up a little bit more, this would probably even kind of toss, it's going to counter toss it up into the air. So you see there's a little bit of a hoop, like try and push it up. And that's purely just grabbing the spring and changing the amount of power in that spring of how quickly they're going to attempt to snap their way back up again. You could slow them down by going to your dynamics, and probably, these springs might be really, really, really strong now, but if I said a linear amount of like 99%, that might 99.9? It's hard to tell. Possibly some drag as well. Let's do 99% drag. Bunk. Yeah, maybe it slows down a little. But if I went easier on the spring, I bet you that we could get it to Yeah, there. It's enough now where the springs are weaker and it's draining enough energy where the keys are trying to spring back more lightly. So there's a lot of stylistic things you could do to have additional control here. Now, I don't actually want those to do that, but it's pretty cool that we can. And yeah, I mean, well, when it works first try, I'm not going to complain. Good question. Thanks for bringing that animation to my attention. It's a cute, a nice, simple, cute concept. Keyboard, keys, dynamic. Dynamic. Yes. Flavio. Yes, I do agree. That's why I was saying you could do this with. You could do this with just a MoGraph setup, but. And yeah, you could just do it with the MoGraph setup. But this is fully dynamic, and it's going to do things like make the sphere react. And it's real. We did it real. It's running fast. It was easy to make copies of. So you could do this in other ways, but this is a real way, and it is quick to make. So I like this one. Whenever you can make it real, it makes me happy. That came from Twitch. So if there are any YouTube questions? No. People chatting, but not questions. Can we use a plane effector to translate one object in positive and the other in negative? One cloner, one plane effector, but positive and negative directions to different objects like a deflector. What's the use case, Amar? Because I think yes is the question, but I'm not quite sure of the visual that you want to do. One object in a positive and the other in a negative. The basics being how it gets applied, and if you can say the use case, if you're saying like, oh, like a zipper or like this or like that. One of the first go-tos I tend to do if you want to alternate is it's the only equation I have memorized, and it's super useful, is if we make a grid, I guess this is better as a linear because I can say 50 on Z, scale them down, and then we just make as many as we want. So let's say I want every other one of these. I want one to go left and the next to go right, and then they alternate that way. You can do that setup very simply with a formula effector. And we make a formula effector. I want it to affect not the scale, yes, the position, and yes, the X position. And the formula for this is just mod brackets ID semicolon 2 close bracket. And there we go. That will automatically go back and forth. So it's just the part I can never remember if it's colon or semicolon. It's just semicolon. Essentially, the way I remember it now is don't add any modifiers. Just type in mod and then don't modify the brackets. Don't modify the colon. Just hit the key and that's the correct one. So this is saying every other one, do the opposite. And because it is outputting min-max, actually, that's kind of interesting. Oh, actually, yeah, it is affecting every other one. So if I drag this negative, then now those are actually going negative. And then you can do things with like fall off. Linear fall off on Z. And now we could take that and go zip, zip. So yeah, that works really nicely, but I don't know if that is specifically what you are asking about. I'm gonna sneeze. At least I'm not coughing anymore. Omar doesn't seem to be following up. So I can't go any further if that's not what you mean. Another thing to keep in mind would be you can do things like invert, like this one formula effector could be doing its thing. And we could, I'm not sure how I would, I guess we could multiply. Let's just say we want the opposite. I'm going to make a second cloner, move it up. And let's say this one I want to do the exact opposite. Well, yeah, we need a second one, or we need them to be dragged in and modified slightly differently. because that's getting this formula effector on both. If I wanted to do the opposite effect, I'd need a copy of the formula effector. Or possibly the fields. We might be able to invert from there, but that might not work. Let's see. That was YouTube. Back to Twitch. Yep, Pro Tools. Good shout out. There is a Rocket Lasso Slack channel. And if you like this type of stuff and you want to be able to always get alerts about it, and there are cool contests and other people asking questions, answering questions, just helping out everybody. There's a cool Rocket Lasso Slack community. You can go to rocketlasso.com and go to the community tab to get it. Easiest way to say it now. Yeah, simple zipper rig. Is there a list of useful formulas somewhere? There's not a list of formulas, but you can get the components of formulas by going to, I wish you could just like right click on formula and then say show help, and they would bring you right to it. But we'll go there. Actually, I think it does. If you right click on formula, it'll go here, and the formulas, well, there's not formulas, but it'll go to this page. But if you scroll in here, a list of possible formulas is found here. And click that, and that will bring you to this page, which is actually the useful one. So this isn't a list of like useful formulas. It's not like here's the zipper formula, but these are all the components that you could use to build a formula. So for instance, where is it? There's mod right there. Oh, actually, it's interesting. The mod works with me doing brackets, but it's supposed to be parentheses. Interesting. But yeah, so that's like how you learn to use mod, but you can clamp things, pick minimums, maximums, random, like generate random numbers. So all that stuff is here. Good to know and help. And I still reference this all the time if I'm trying to do something specific. Pierre is asking about interconnected neurons. We do get neuron questions pretty often, but that's not to say that we shouldn't tackle them again, because you might get something better. Is that a video? Let me mute tab. What do we got? Oh, you're probably meaning this one. It's a good question. We could do some sort of approximation, but I don't have anything new to say on it yet. But ask me this one again in the future, but not now. But it is really cool. And just because we showed it, this is from Mayo Clinic. And it's pretty nice looking. Part of the tricky bit there goes to there's almost like an intelligence to that where you need them to be smart enough to get fed a neighbor. So there's almost like a code element to that. It is really cool though. Sorry, Rogue, no hint. RBX, what do you got? How do we control a slider with Xpresso that is already used by Xpresso? So two individual sliders controlled by Xpresso, that both sliders should be controlled by one main slider. Ooh, okay, let me see if I can parse that. How can we control a slider with Xpresso that is already used by Xpresso? Okay, so I think I know what you mean. Let's go and do it. That's an interesting question. It's a fun, let me save this as a zipper rig. I like Xpresso questions, and this is a nice, very specific one. So that is nice. I approve. So let's set this up. And let me know if I get this right. We are going to do the simplest possible version, and that is I'm going to make some custom user datas, and we will have 3 sliders that will control the length of these. Obviously, we could just directly do this, but we use Xpresso to do it, and it's just going to be a nice, clean way of showing it. So add a data, and this will just be X, and it goes from 0 to 100. Actually, that could be real. So it'll go from 0 to 2000. Yeah, 0 to 200, and that's X. That can get copied again and again. So we have X, Y, and Z. So we just say OK on that. And now we have a user data of X, Y, and Z. By selecting those, I can right click, say user interface, float slider. And now we have 3 sliders. Right click, and let's make the basic Xpresso, which is under programming tags now. Give it a minute to open. There it is. All right. Drag in the cube. Drag in the cube again. I want to control the... Actually, we'll drag these in individually. In the object, I want to control X, Y, and Z. And those will be controlled by our user data. So that will be X. I missed X. You have to do them one at a time, which is a little annoying. X, Y, and Z. Okay, so just to demonstrate, if we feed these in, then now we have 3 sliders, and those will be controlling our cube. So that's now overridden, and these are now Xpresso driven, doing their thing. Now, my assumption is that you want to now make another slider. I'm going to make another copy of this at the top, and we'll just call this the master slider. And the idea would be that if I were to change this master slider, all these other ones will jump to whatever this one is telling it to do. Now, currently, actually, this is going to be way more straightforward. So maybe I'm missing an element because I thought, like, these are being controlled by Xpresso. Well, they're not being controlled by Xpresso. They are controlling Xpresso. So let's just keep doing what I mentioned here. And then we can possibly add that extra element to make it more complicated if I can wrap my brain around it. So this will just get a master slider in there. Oh yeah, actually this will do it. This will demonstrate it because we'll see the problem almost immediately. No, how did I do that? Oop, I don't know what I just did, but I shrunk it and now I can't rescale it. So, all right, this is what I was hoping the question would be, or what I thought the question would be. So, unfortunately, I just have to do this manually again. I need another cube in here, and that will control the X, the Y, and the Z. So if I drag master in and say, okay, that is now going to take control of these controls. So it's like, okay, cool. So now you would hope that you could go in here and be like, oh, like I'm going to drag X and then Y and Z, but no, they're now being overridden constantly by the master. This is always taking control of those other ones via Xpresso. You can actually see it like having to do this interface refresh. You can see how this one moves and then the other ones catch up. It's not a frame of lag. It's just like how the interface has to behave. So this is overriding those always. This is always saying you are what I tell you to be all the time. We need to change that condition. We need to give it a condition. Currently the condition is always. So here's how we do that. Let's set up a condition, and that will be if master has changed values. So we do that with one of my favorite nodes, which is, I think, the history. Nope, not history. It's the memory. Search for memory node. So here's the memory node. I will feed in master into the input, and we need to set the history depth to 2 and then the history level to 1. You just have to do that. You also have to do in that order, because if this is set to 1, can't go, it always has to be one lower than that. So we have to raise that up by 1 so that we can raise that by up by 1. All this is doing is saying every time this refreshes, this is outputting what that said the previous frame or the previous refresh. So now searching for the word compare, let's grab a compare node, and I would like to compare what it used to be to what it currently is. And if those two things are not equal, so not equal, then that means it has changed. So currently this is a statement saying true or false, saying, has this changed? Oh, those two things are not equal? Then that means it did update. It did change. So now we need to say, okay, if it changed, then do this. And in the input, if I say on, it is saying on. So when on is true, execute. It's only true when master updates. So if I were to grab this and drag it into on, now we can close that. And under here, I am now free to change these values to anything I want and individually control any parameter. And then if I grab the master slider and move it, all of them will now go and catch up to it, because the master slider is going from 71 to 151, which means it changed. But now it's not changing. It's still 151 compared to 151, which means, hey, don't update. Don't worry about executing that chunk of Xpresso. And that means these are free to be individually manipulated until the slider changes again, in which case they'll all go do exactly what it wanted to do. I hope that was answering the question, because that was a nice, quick, clear demonstration, at least I think so, of that concept. And it's one I've been using for years and years. Xpresso limit control override. And yeah, super useful. Save. Okay, looks like that's what you were looking for. And yeah, it's really fun to be able to do that. And you can make really complex conditions. This is like the simplest possible one. Just being, I mean, honestly, it's just this. It's just these two nodes, memory, compare. And it sets a condition for on. It's the kind of thing, and here's another thing that I might do. I mean, this isn't a great example of the position of the type of setup, but I would make, you could make a copy of this cube, and even though this is saying like, oh, that's getting overridden, well, it's only happening on that change. So we could make a second one, and I can make a, let's search for time. So here is the time, and I don't want to output time, I do want to output the frame. So I could say, copy this compare node over and say when frame equals 0. So at the time of 0, so like when, just like dynamics resets at the time of 0, we could say at the time of 0, this is now true. And then we can set these to whatever we want. So we could say, hey, at the time of 0, let's search for a constant. Here's a constant number. I could say at the time of 0, I want all of X, Y, and Z, and honestly, potentially even the master slider. But let's just do X, Y, and Z. We could set those all to go to 50 at the time of 0. So if we're moving our slider anywhere we want, then we can set these to anything we want. This will override that, and it did. But then if I rewind to the time of 0, those will all jump to 50. And at the time of 50, they're always going to be overridden. But as soon as we go even one frame forward, that condition is no longer met, and those are free to move again. And that it's not, I will do this type of thing all the time on a rig if something needs to get reset at a condition, and the time of 0 is a common condition. So I'll just save that as another version. It's a little fancier. Time reset. That's also like the most basic loop to like make a video game. Back to Twitch, see if there's a question there. People talking back and forth. No, not a new question. I haven't really used the Python effector. I haven't had specific uses I wanted to do with it, but it's a thing. Meeks had a cotton clouds question. I know this was, you posted this a little bit ago. Let's see what we've got. This is from Sam Southward. And Nexus Studio. Cute. Did you call out a time code? Stop motion digital. Time. Oh, this is a making of. Where's the cotton clouds you were talking about? Oh, they might have made this all for real. Where is... It's not that long. How am I missing cotton clouds? I might be utterly blind, or I'm just somehow the scrub is not landing on a place where there's cotton clouds in here. It seems cool. I know it is 3D. They showed a couple of sets, so I thought it was real, but maybe not. Oh, my chat is here. Clouds at 120. Wow, I must have just been scrubbing badly. Oh. We don't see them moving. Those are just like wisps of cotton. Also, I'm not sure, but the fact that they're showing these look like they took actual cotton. This is, I think this is probably a photo of real cotton. So your question essentially was like, okay, how can we emulate this cotton look in 3D? But this company who just made this 3D piece said, okay, it's crazy to try and make this cotton. Let's just take a photo of real cotton on a black background and we can use it as an alpha channel. Honestly, I don't have a great answer because of the sheer amount. Like the randomness and yeah, like there's a flow to it, but there's also a randomness to it. And if you were to look at just even right there in the tippy tail, there's probably still like hundreds of fibers to form these. So like, is there certain things we do to emulate it to a certain degree? Like potentially something I'd be a little bit curious about. I just kind of stepped through the idea of this volume. The one thing I'll try is what if that had the same volume? What if we just work from this file and sorry, just adjusting the chat on the other screen so I can monitor it. If we take this and make it something super hiccuping, make that fully white, probably crank that over, redshift, render view. So if we make this white under advanced, this is the most important parameter is the density. So lowering that down, let's say 33, 22. So you start getting it a little bit transparent. So my thought here is, what if we also generated like a bunch of hairs or something? And then we kind of let this puffiness do its own thing. And by putting a couple of highlight hairs, if that would kind of be like, oh, okay, those are filling in the rest. I kind of don't think it will. We might be able to do, there might be ways of overlaying some noise and whatnot. I don't want to spend too much time on it because I just don't think it's something that's super practical. I mean, in a lot of ways, it'd probably be better to even have a whole bunch of hairs as a texture to put on one hair, so that one hair could represent more than one and get more of an overall flow. And even right now, trying to think of how I want to generate a bunch of hairs here that are doing approximately the correct movement. I'm not even super sure on that. Perhaps I can generate hair on the spline. And yeah, right now we're generating hair on the spline. It's auto. Go to guides, count. Let's do 400. Regrow. Does it do it? Spline vertex. Now I want it to be spline uniform. Regrow. No. Oh, 40. Go back. Regrow. There we go. Okay, so now I'm able to get a few more. Those are the guides. The normals can be random. Regrow. Oh, stop rendering. Regrow. Hey, why are you not? Oh, that's regrow. Okay, yeah, sorry, not reroute, regrow. So now we can get these random hairs going. And I mean, I imagine even here we'd need quite a few. We will be curling them, so I'll leave it at 8. Regrow. So now we've got quite a few. And then under our hair material, actually, even the hair material is not going to show up in Redshift. We're going to have to apply. We're going to have to apply our own Redshift material to get it to show up. I don't think hairs just show up by themselves. I don't think. I guess let's hit render and check. They might. Oh, I guess they do have it set up to do it. That looks weird and spiky, but I guess even though we don't even have it close to doing anything yet, there's kind of a cottony-ness right there. So maybe there's some potential. So it does seem to view the hairs in a way that I wasn't expecting. So let's try making it entirely white, and we'll just see if we can get them to show up. I want a bunch of, not curl, oh yeah, curl, not clump. So, and I want to be able to see it. So hairs, generate, editor. I want to see hairlines, please. So that's the actual hairs, the final hairs. And we're only seeing 25% of them, so let's keep that in mind. Some frizziness, please. Curl, direction, hair. Let's do random. Yeah, why not? And yeah, those are the individual hairs, each doing their own thing. So let's just see what that does and see if it shows up. Yes and no. They need to be really thin. 0.2. Yeah, those get thinner then. And it's not bad. I mean, I do wonder if like we would want them clumping up and whatnot, or getting more uniformity between them to get like those clumps where there is a little bit more coherence. Like maybe the frizz is a bad idea here. Maybe we would want them doing their transition a little bit more. So yeah, the more uniformity, it could actually be a positive in this case. It's these thicker parts, and I don't know the redshift volumes well enough, but like these thicker parts are like overpowering it. But on these partial ones, it's not terrible. I wouldn't say it's cotton, but it definitely feels like a big clump of lint, where they do transition between each other better than I thought they would. And then I guess there is some darkness in it, so we could, under the illumination, go easy on like shadow. I don't know. Actually, there's a good chance that these settings don't translate into redshift. I don't know how the hair material gets automatically translated into redshift. I'm impressed at seeing it at all, honestly. That's where I will stop this one. I'll save the scene file in case anybody's interested in like exploring it further. It's the kind of thing that I'll keep in mind in my own experiments, so maybe I can be more informed in the future. But it's not terrible. It's not amazing, but it's not bad. There might be something there. And I guess just for the sake of it, let's see what it looks like without the volume. So this is just the hairs. I guess actually the clumps, just these clumps of hairs are not, they do look like pretty good balls of lint. I wouldn't say cotton, but they do look like pretty good balls of lint. And Redshift is just doing a great job of, like, they just look really nice. Trying to think of anything I might think to do to make them a little bit more uniform, but I don't know. It's a situation of there's supposed to be a uniformity in a way, but we also need a lot of randomness, and it's just not I can't immediately think of a setup that gives us the best of both of those worlds. So we've got good lint balls. So we'll leave these at lint balls. Let's see. If it's a quick one, we have time to squeeze in one more question. And again, these scene files will be available for people on Patreon. I'm going to call it lint balls. Redshift. Yep. I do not use aces at all. I don't render very often. I'm just not a person who does all that much rendering. Jed, I have not specifically really considered any other renderer. I wasn't even using Redshift until Maxon purchased it. It is my goal to, because I don't render that often, it is my goal to support, well, to work on the most common one, the one that's going to be used by the most people, because it's not terribly important to me. Everybody's got their favorite render. If I was like, oh, let me think about cycles, and I start playing with cycles, then the Arnold people are going to be like, hey, like, how about Arnold? And then the Octane people will be like, how about Octane? For every renderer, that would be the case. So me having the ready answer of like, well, Redshift is the one supported officially by Maxon, so that's the one I will use if I'm going to use a third-party renderer. I guess at that point, well, it's still, I guess, third-party. It is a separate team that develops that, even if they get to work really closely with Maxon. But that is currently my policy. Yeah, Tobias, we could clone more hair onto... Well, even right now, cloning each hair... We could clone more hairs, but right now it is not... These are not individual hairs getting cloned onto individual strands. These are hairs that are blending from one strand to the next to the next. Like they're looking at their neighbors and then blending between those. So this isn't even like individual clumps of hairs doing their thing. It's a series of... It's 5,000 hairs transitioning between all of the different guidelines. So even that wouldn't be a smooth transition. Potentially could be interesting, but you'd have to, like, at that point I would clone a series of like individual polygons along the spline, and the individual polygons could then spawn a bunch of hairs, and those would all start out clustered together. Could be a way to go. I don't doubt that the great Zalam is talking about how it does great volumes, arguably the best volumes. And I don't doubt that at all. I mean, every renderer has its really good niche. Like Octane cannot be beat for quickly making something look pretty. It just seems to, it's going to give you the fastest response and it looks the best out of the box. And then Arnold seems to be used in a lot more of, bigger studios tend to seem to use Arnold. And Redshift seems to be the most common one. Like, and it's going to be available to more of the people. Maurice, rolling a cube on a plane. We've kind of talked about that before. And I mean, it's good. I'm not shy about tackling a question a second time. I think that somebody had made a plugin that does that automatically. The two main ones would be, for me, one, making it fully dynamic and just using forces to make it roll, boom, 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 on one. It's actually pretty straightforward to do that. In fact, let's see how quickly I can make that happen. So if we add dynamics to both of these, rigging. The problem is it's going to move really fast, but let's add add two dynamics tags, put on a decent, actually we can add on a cartoonish amount of friction because it's not supposed to move at all. It's supposed to roll, and then add a simulation, force, and honestly, we just do wind. So here's a wind blowing off to the side, hit play, and it's not going to do anything in the beginning, but if we get this calibrated to the right amount, bink, there we go. So now you can see it's going to roll, and there's possibly a lower amount, and the smaller the amount we can do, the better. The only problem being is that once it starts rolling, I think it'd probably keep on accelerating and possibly rolling faster and faster and faster. But you see how quickly I was able to put that together? The thought there being, if we add in some damping, I like to do 99% damping. Yeah, so at 99%, this is... You see that we're back under control now. You see it's going to tip it over, but it's not like getting out of control. So that's just a very, very quick... I'm not even going to save that, but that's a very quick setup. If you want to do it more mechanically... And honestly, like I said, I think somebody has a plugin that does this automatically. But my go-to for making something mechanically roll like this would be a series of nulls in the exact place. So if we put a null in the corner, which is going to be exactly 100 and 100, then now we have a null exactly in the corner. So if the cube was made a child of that, this null could now rotate. And let's set this to linear just to keep it as simple as possible. Control D, keyframe, linear. So this will rotate on B. So B, record, 10 frames later, rotate 90 degrees. Nice. So that is now going to rotate the cube, bink, right there. So if we wanted the next one, then we'd put a second null. In this case, I can copy and paste the existing null. And I think, let's see, that's going to, the parent comes later. I might be doing this. The great Zalam is saying that it's called Rollit Plugin, and they just updated it to newer C4D. Yeah, I think I used that back. That's a really old plugin back in the day. So the Rollit Plugin, I put it in the YouTube chat as well. I'm trying to think of which one comes first, because that will tip over and then go there. Now, if this is the next parent, yeah, so this one... I want to make this one happen 10 frames later, and I need to move it over another 100 units and make it a child there. I might have not gotten this order correct. No, it seems like I did. So now you can see that the first null rotates 90 degrees, and now the second null rotates 90 degrees. And you could just keep on repeating that again and again and again. And each null is only doing 90 degrees worth of work, but eventually you end up with a perfect rolling cube. But there's a nice, pretty cheap plugin that I think automatically will do it with any shape. Like you can roll an egg or crazy things, and it does a really good job. Rollit has bugs, Ross Vader says. Well, something to keep in mind. And, but yeah, the dynamic method I think is a pretty good one. There might be additional things even to the rig to make it be smarter. I don't know. But that puts us pretty much perfectly on time. Like I said, I did a 4-hour live stream yesterday, and tomorrow I'll be recording a tutorial. So I need to not completely lose my voice before I record a tutorial. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming and hanging out. It was really fun. As I said, do I still have it up? No, it looks like I closed it. Oh, well. But yeah, I've got a really cool tutorial about vacuum forming that I'm hoping to record. It'll be out in a week or two after I do all the editing and everything. And I'll have enough time to make some Instagram posts, I think, this time, because I'm actually trying to make it look a little bit pretty. Very good questions. Thank you so much, everybody. I really love like the mix of YouTube and Twitch because we get very different flavors of questions on them. So it's fun to be like, oh, here's an Xpresso question. Oh, here's a beautiful animation. How do we build this element of it? I really like the keyboard pushing too. Any excuse to make a fully real dynamic rig. And I was hoping the cloner would work, and it did. Very rare for us to have everything work perfectly as we step forward in something. So it's really fun. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming and hanging out. As I mentioned, there's a Patreon set up. You get the scene files on there, and you also get access to the Tuesday and Thursday live streams, and you get early access to everything posting a little bit early. So that's the thing. That should do it for today. I'll have this replay posted on on Patreon really quick, and it'll be public a week from now. And other than that, it'll wrap it up. Thank you so much, everybody. And I'll see you either tomorrow for the bonus stream or next week for the regular one. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.